Thank you so much. It's so amazing to have you in Vancouver. I can't imagine. It's like, you know what? This is my honor of my career, man. So thank you so much, Dr. Chen. Now, obviously, right now, everybody is talking about the U.S., the conflicts between U.S. and China, the inflations. I think that we talk about this inflation every day and the interest rates every day. So what can you tell us about this, one thing is that, do you think this is man-made? I always think that this is man-made. Is it really man-made or is this just Tina Mac thinking? So let me translate that quickly into Cantonese. 咁咧我就想問阿陳博士啦，個個都成日都講啦，通貨膨脹同埋利息升啊，嚟到控制個通貨膨脹。我成日就問一樣嘢，究竟咧呢個通貨膨脹同埋呢個利息嘅情況咧係咪人為嘅咧？其實係咪我哋可以避免嘅咧 ？So Dr. Chen, please share with us.
What we see here is a situation when a country has some challenges, whether it's the United States or China, in order to have a situation where you can deflect any criticism or any concern about internal problems, sometimes you create some conflict. And this is something the United States does all the time. This is something other countries do. So there's a possibility that some of it is due to deflect from the other issues that are going on in the country.
OK， 咁佢嘅意思咧就係話咧有個可能性嘅，因為咧國家經濟唔好嘅時候咧就指指點點啦，咁咧就美國咧就經常性咧都會做呢件事㗎啦，咁係經濟唔好嘅時候，咁但係呢樣嘢咧就唔係淨係唔係淨係美國係咁嘅，其他國家咧都會係咁嘅。So this pointing finger things is hurting everybody. So when it's hurting everybody, how can we do you see the end of the tunnel about this war, this inflations? When is this if inflations can potentially control? Because the war is very different from decades ago. Like World War II, and it's very different. So how the Fed or Bank of Canada control the inflation by putting the interest rates, hiking the interest rate? Is that really helping, or is it going to create more pain because of recession? Just let me quickly translate that. 咁我嘅意思咧就係話啦，因為咧個個都即係指手督腳啦，咁令到咧就通貨膨脹繼續啦。咁我就問佢啦，幾時會完咧？呢個通貨膨脹？第一，第二咧呢個利率究竟係咪可以係咪繼續咁樣上去咧？咩情況之下咧可以令到咧就可以受到控制咧咁樣樣 ？OK。
The answer is inflation is already starting to come down. Whether you look at Canada, you saw the latest inflation numbers at 6.9%.
Yeah.
Much lower than they were at the peak. In the United States, the consumer price index hit a peak of 9%. Now we're looking at inflation in the consumer price index at 8.2%. So it is coming down. And of course, the supply chains, which are really responsible for a lot of the inflation, are improving. So the trend towards lower inflation has begun. If you look at any country, must always look at liquidity. In February of 2021, in the United States, money supply was growing at 26.9%. Now, the money supply is only growing by 2.6%.
Oh.
My research finds that with about a 14-month lag, when you reduce liquidity, when you reduce the money supply, inflation does come down. So inflation...
Stop printing money.
Inflation will come down
Okay.
in the next 14 months.
OK， 咁佢嗱講佢最撈尾嗰句先啦，通貨膨脹未來14個月會跌落嚟㗎啦。其實最主要咧，佢意思咧就係話咧，其實咧睇到咧加拿大咧同埋美國嗰個通貨膨脹咧都已經係有下滑嘅跡象。加拿大咧而家係6.9% 啦，大家都知道最高嗰陣時係超過7啦。美國咧就係最高嗰陣時9%咧，而家8.2%啦。其實佢話最主要咧呢個通貨膨脹咧就係因為嗰個supply chain 啊，即係個供應鏈嘅問題。咁呢個供應鏈咧而家亦都係有一個開始緩衝啦，開始好啦。最主要嚟講咧就係話咧印銀紙啊。喺2021年嘅時候咧，印銀紙個情況咧就係26.9%嘅。 咁好多錢啦，周圍放啦，周圍全世界都有好多美金啦。咁但係而家嚟講咧，喺佢個研究之中咧，係跌到咧得2.6% 啫。咁即係都即係跌得好高啦。咁所以變咗咧就真係總之一日佢唔發銀紙嗰個咧通脹咧就會係可以控制㗎啦。So I guess the interest rate is gonna go up for furthermore. Does it mean that for another couple more times? You think?
Well, what we're going to see from all central banks is that they have to continue to raise rates higher, even though the money supply is slowing down. Inflation is still too high. And so, yes, in the United States, they will have to keep raising rates. In Canada, they will have to keep raising rates. But because so much has already been done, we are getting closer to the point where the increase in rates is going to be slower. And in fact, the Bank of Canada recently only raised rates by 0.5 percentage point when the market thought they would be raising more. 75 basis points.
Yes.
So we will see a similar action in the United States very soon.
OK， 咁咧嗱，最主要嚟講咧就係話啦，即係因為咧所有頭先我哋講嘅供應鏈啊已經OK 啦，即係唔係 OK 啊，即係已經係有改善啦。咁所以變咗咁情況之下咧，咁我問佢啊嘛，會唔會即係繼續去升利息咧？係咪係咁上咧？咁樣樣，咁佢意思咧，佢話係嘅，利息咧會係繼續上到咁嘅情況之下咧，即係上到咧嗰個通貨膨脹咧。係即係佢哋覺得咧可以受到控制啦。咁佢哋見到咧就係話好似加拿大，大家都知道啦，上次起息咧即係50個點啫，唔係75個點。咁美國咧亦都係會係一樣嘅。咁所以咁嘅情況之下咧，大家都要記住一件事咧，呢個痛苦嘅即係呢個時間咧係應該係越嚟越短，所以咧就要即係 hold 住。即係要撐住咁先得啦。So I think that everybody we just need to just stay put, don't get too negative. It's too many negative news out there that kills people psychologically. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And what we see is there's a lot of concern that somehow things are much, much worse. But the reality is that the economy is slowing down, but anything that you will see either in Canada or in the United States is probably not going to be more than a mild recession. Keep in mind that on average, in countries like the United States, we get a recession every 5.3 years. And the expansion are much longer than the recessions, which only last about 10 months. That's why over long periods of time, we should all be happy. We get richer, we make more money, the good times last longer than the bad times.
OK， 咁我問佢啦嘛，我話哎呀，媒體講啲嘢咧咁鬼死負面，搞到個個咧都好似真係人心惶惶咁樣樣。咁佢話係啊，佢絕對贊成媒體講嘅嘢咧係灰過真實情況好多倍嘅。咁基本上咧，美國同加拿大咧將會係一個即係面臨一個咧就係即係一個係比較好溫和嘅，正所謂溫和式嘅 recession，OK？ 經濟衰退係溫和式嘅。咁佢話咧喺美國咧基本上咧係每5.3年啊，即係5年零3個月，平均計啦，5.3年咧佢就會咧就有一個正所謂經濟衰退㗎啦。但係實質上嗰個經濟衰退咧，只不過咧係10個月嘅啫，係every single time when Americans is doing something。The Canadian thinks that we have to follow, or we follow. Like, do you see, there's a connections? And our banking system is very different than your banking system. And with all this situation, why does people or Canadian keep on thinking that whatever US is doing, we're gonna follow, right? Because Canadian is very much, like follow everything. But in 2008, we see that some of the markets in US literally took as long as 10 years to come back. In Vancouver, 2008, in BC, Vancouver, we took 6 months to bounce back. So that already told me that not everything because it's subprime. People didn't know what subprime means at that time. Just they thought that whatever happened in US is going to happen here. Then, like we just I just share with you, right? So Canada Bank, Bank of Canada, we are AAA rating with the Moody. So would love to have your 2 cents about what is going on.
Well, what you saw in 2008 certainly was that the Canadian banking system the foundations were much stronger than the U.S. banks, who took unnecessary risk when they made the subprime loans. That did not happen in a similar fashion in Canada, which explains why the Canadian banking system bounced back so quickly. The U.S. banks have learned their lesson, and very good news that Canada didn't have to learn their lesson because they were more responsible at the time. Now, why do you do those things? Because obviously high profits, but when you get these super high profits, then you get higher risk. But as to why the Canadians and the U.S. have that relationship where the Canadians are always very excited to follow the U.S., as you say, maybe because such a huge trading relationship of Canada versus the U.S. And you can make the argument that economically, Canada depends more on the U.S. than the U.S. depends on Canada, even though the U.S. and Canada is the largest trading partner for the U.S. But as you all know, the U.S. is more of a closed economy, and so trade is important, but not crucial. But it is very important for Canada. And one example of that is that if you look at the trade-weighted dollar for the Canadian, the so-called trade-weighted index, 80% of the value of that Canadian dollar in terms of the trade-weighted is the U.S. dollar. So again, it shows the importance of the U.S. And the U.S. a bit more diversified. So that, I think, explains some of the dynamics of that relationship.
I see. Okay, let me just translate that. 嗱，其實咧，喺廣告之前咧，我就問佢陳博士咧，就有一個問題嘅。點解加拿大人成日都覺得咧，我哋係要跟風美國？佢嘅意思咧就係因為咧，其實好大，即係大家都明白。美國同埋加拿大嗰個貿易係一個全世界最大嘅貿易伙伴嚟嘅。咁咧，其實如果你講起咧，即係80% 嘅加拿大嘅貿易伙伴咧嘅出口啊、入口啊，所有嘢咧都係同美金有關嘅。咁嘅情況之下咧，就令到咧好多人咧就會覺得我哋加拿大咧係好依賴喺美國嗰方面，但係美國咧就唔同喎，美國咧就唔係一定咧依賴，即係美國咁大，全世界都有，咁美金又正所謂嘅即係貿易嘅貨幣，咁所以咧美國咧就即係多元化啲啦，就唔係話即係加拿大咧就係一個最主要嘅貿易，即係對佢嚟講嗰個百分比唔係咁多，所以即係令到咧好多人咧加拿大咧就覺得咧係美國咧所有嘅事咧就好似咧佢哋發生咧。就美國發生嘅時候咧，我哋加拿大咧都發生，其實咧都唔係一件事嘅。So when it comes to housing, what do you think? U.S. housing right now is like bad news after bad news after bad news.
Well, the answer is that the housing sector in the United States is going through a recession. There's no question. Because if you look at the average of new home sales and existing home sales, the average is more than 20% decline. And that's just a rule of thumb we have, that whenever there's more than a 20% decline in the stock market, we call it a so-called bear market. And so, yes, housing is, in fact, in a recession. And housing is an important share. If you look at residential, it's close to 5%. If you look at housing services, which means the real estate agents, the services of housing, it starts to look more like a 16% of share of the economy. But if 16% share of the economy is in recession, it doesn't mean the entire economy is in a recession. And the rest of the economy is still resilient enough that I'm comfortable in saying the U.S. is not in a recession, even though we can also have another conversation as to whether it is going into recession, which I do think it will.
OK， 咁咧我就同佢講啦，我就問阿陳博士啦，佢話即係美國嘅樓價咧係真係跌嘅，咁佢話咧唔可以否認美國嘅樓市咧係進入咗一個咧衰退期，任何嘅樓價係跌20% 或者更大嘅幅度嘅時候咧，呢個就係一個衰退期，所以咧。亦都咁嘅情況之下咧，亦都有個可能，即係唔係個可能性啊？你跌嘅時候，我哋嘅中國人話齋嘛，有危又就有機㗎啦，係咪？咁如果你想落去美國買嘢嘅時候，咁而家咪平咗20幾個%咯。好啦，因為咁嘅情況之下咧，嗱，其實咧 美國嗰個地產行業咧係佔美國嗰、個經濟咧係16% 嘅啫。咁你即係呢個16% 嘅時候咧，咁你會唔會話好似變咗美國係一個經濟衰退咧？又未知道，所以咧佢覺得咧，亦都唔需要去講到咧美國咧係喺一個經濟衰退，但係佢亦都講過會唔會係有一個嘅經濟衰退咧？咁佢話咧就拭目以待，或者
I'm very impressed and happy to be here in Canada because the Canadian economy right now is much stronger than the U.S.
Really?
We saw the
Good to
second
see.
quarter with the Canadian real GDP growing at 3.3% compared to the U.S., which contracted by 0.6%. And so we are seeing good strength in the Canadian economy so far this year, much more impressive than the U.S. economy. All of you should be very proud of that.
Yes, we should celebrate, right? OK， 咁啊點解咧？我點解咁開心咧？因為咧，阿陳博士咧，佢係睇到咧，係喺所有數據方面咧，加拿大嘅經濟咧係非常之強勁，個 GDP 咧係升咗3.3%嘅，但係咧美國咧相反嚟講咧係減0.6%。減0.6喎，負啊，即係所謂減啊，應該咁樣，中文唔係幾好，負0.6，所以咧你睇下美國同加拿大，我哋個經濟唔係差，所以大家唔好驚得咁陰公。OK，US and China, the conflicts, do you see it will kind of like slow down or carry on or stop? What do you think?
I think that there are going to be some challenges ahead. But Canada and the United States and China versus the United States are important economies. And China and the U.S. are the first and the second largest economies in the world, being the U.S. #1 and then China #2. But I think if you look at the longer term trend, China will start to get stronger and stronger and grow faster and faster. And
US doesn't like it.
It will take over and be equal to the United States in terms of GDP.
They don't like it.
This is not going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen. Now, I say that completely aware that the demographics in China suggest that the strong potential growth is going to slow down, but the potential growth in China today is about 4%, and the United States potential growth is about 1.9%. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure out that at some point the Chinese economy will become very similar and almost as strong, if not stronger, than the U.S. economy. It will happen.
So there's more fight then.
I think that there will be some challenges, but at some point, large economies have to get along, otherwise they cannot continue to grow.
I
so
know.
they will come to the conclusion someday that it's better to get along than not to get along.
Yes. Totally agree。咁咧就我同佢講啊嘛，中美咁係咁打幾耐咧嚇，即係大家都即係指手畫腳咁樣樣。咁但係咧佢最主要嚟講咧就係話咧，好簡單一句説話，就算你聽幾多中國嘅經濟唔好之類咁嘢，中國嘅增長將會係4%，美國嘅增長係1.9%。佢哋你細蚊仔嘅唔識計數嘅，都聽到一個4，一個1.9，都知道發生緊咩事啦。咁佢話咧，即係而家美國都仲係第一大經濟國家，國內中國就第二大，佢遲早咧就會扯平㗎啦，或者超過。咁我話啦，美國唔中意呢樣嘢㗎嘛，所以咁咪打餐死咯，係咪？咁但係咧，佢話中美就算即係始終咧都要咧，大家去揾個機會啦，揾個點啦，交叉點咧。就大家都要握下手，傾下偈，做個好朋友嗰隻㗎啦。So I really appreciate your input and insight today. Thank you so much, my dear.
Thank you.
多謝。